Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, January 31st. We are going to start off our morning looking at H586, which was just referred over here from Environment and Energy Committee. This is one of a number of bills we're looking at to try to get our minds around resilience, climate, infrastructure, whatever adjective you want to use for the fund. Whichever one you want would be. But this is sort of a project that we started before the flooding happened. And we had that really helpful report from JFO about sort of various ways of funding infrastructure. And in the aftermath of the flooding, we have a lot of different pieces of legislation that are related to it. So we're sort of going through them all in an effort to find a path forward in one or a few of them. And so thank you, Michael, for joining us and taking us through 586 today.
Okay, you're welcome. Do you want me to go through each section or just the revenue?
Can you do like very surface on each section and then deep?
Sure.
Thank you.
Good morning. This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. I'm here to give you a walkthrough of H586 and Act relating to flood protection and climate resilience infrastructure and financing. Generally, before I get into the text of the bill, although only 13 pages long, does 7 significant things. It creates a new special fund for climate infrastructure and resilience funding that would provide loans and other financing for climate mitigation and resilience. It amends some of the authority of the Clean Water Board related to how much money maximum they can recommend for award for the water quality enhancement grants. It amends the Clean Water Service Provider authority to direct priority for those projects, climate mitigation and resilience. It amends the Water Quality Enhancement Grant Program to allow for grants for climate mitigation and resilience. It directs that all of the property transfer tax revenue that should go to VHCB by statute, that 50% should be directed to them in this fiscal year and should not be lowered as is the custom. And then it requires A&R's basin planning, which is a process by which A&R goes out and basically maps the uses of the 15 major watersheds in the state. As part of those plans, A&R is directed to identify climate mitigation and resilience projects that could be implemented to help with climate mitigation and resilience. And then last, it asks for VCGI to map the flood risks of the state. So that's generally the 7 major things that the bill does. I will note also right now that there's a provision in this bill that I don't understand. And I have been very clear that I don't understand it. And maybe you all know what it means, and I'll get to that right in a minute.
That's scary.
So,
I think it's exciting. I'm
That's
gonna add it.
exactly what I said.
We'll add a new challenge to our day. Yes.
Just a quick, maybe it's a quick question. What happens when somebody notwithstands a notwithstand? Like they notwithstand so you can transfer money that would otherwise go to VHCB, but then you say, notwithstanding the people who notwithstand. You see what I mean?
We'll get to that language in a minute.
Okay.
So the first section is that creation of the Climate Infrastructure and Resilience Fund. It's a broad authority for this fund to provide loans and other forms of financing for climate change mitigation and resilience. So you're on page 2, lines 9 through 12 for that. There will be a board that will basically administer this fund. There's multiple treasurer, CEO of VITA, executive director of VHCB, one person appointed by the governor, one person by the speaker, and one person by the committee and the committee. They'll develop a strategy for the authority to finance climate change and mitigation projects. They shall have the authority as part of that strategy to basically leverage federal, state, municipal, or private resources. Now, here's the thing I don't understand.
Before you get to the part you don't understand, they'll develop a strategy to fund it?
They develop the strategy. Yep.
Okay, fascinating.
And then what the fund consists of, and this is what I don't, 2.5% of the state's cash balance. I asked the sponsor what that means, and she said that's the language that the state treasurer recommended that be included, but I don't know what that means.
He's coming in tomorrow, I think, and so we can ask him tomorrow rather than hypothesizing today. Were you about to hypothesize?
Yeah, I
Let's just not hypothesize today and wait until tomorrow. Thank you.
Just to be clear, I don't know what that means. I think.
Okay.
But other gifts, donations, and fees received from any source that are dedicated to the fund and any other revenues dedicated by the General Assembly for the fund. Notwithstanding the special fund provisions in Title 32, the unexpended balances and any earnings remain in the fund from year to year.
So there is hypothetically funds in the fund, but the folks on the fund are also going to develop a strategy for how to put more stuff into the fund.
Well, they're gonna develop a strategy for how to use the revenue that's already in the fund, but they're also gonna develop a strategy to how to leverage any federal, state, or municipal funds for climate mitigation and resilience.
Okay, and right now, it doesn't look like any other existing funds are subsumed into this.
Not right now, no, and you'll see later on, when you get into the grant funds for the clean water service providers, at least one of them, there are others. It has multiple purposes. Right now, that water quality enhancement fund is about water quality projects, but now it's going to be about water quality and climate resilience.
Okay.
Mike, when you gave us the high level preview, you said the money from VHCB would be for 1 year.
So yeah, we're going to get to that in a second. That's a subsequent section. Section 2 creates positions to support the Climate Infrastructure and Resilience Fund. So money is appropriated to various agencies for support of this fund. And you'll see them all on page 4, 125,000 to those specifically listed entities to support this fund and work under the fund. Then you get to section 3, the Clean Water Board. As you know, the Clean Water Board makes recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly annually about how to spend the money that's in the Clean Water Fund. I think this year there's just over $50 million in the fund for appropriation. One of the priorities in the fund when the board makes a recommendation is how to fund the water quality enhancement grants. And currently that is capped at a $5 million recommendation. The bill would recommend that the cap on the recommendation for the water quality enhancement grants increase to $8 million. Doesn't mean that it's going to be $8 million. It's the most that the board can recommend to be spent on water quality enhancement grants. Remember, the board doesn't spend money. The board just recommends to you how to spend from the fund. That brings you to clean water service providers. Just to refresh your memory, a few years ago, in the state's attempt to meet the goals of the Clean Water Initiative and specifically Lake Champlain TMDL, it was determined that there wasn't going to be enough projects set at the state level to meet those goals, and that there needed to be more localized on the ground projects implemented by regional and local interested parties. And you created what was called the Clean Water Service Provider model, by which there is an entity that's appointed for each of the major watersheds to work on and find those small projects that will help the state meet its Clean Water Initiative goals. And you directed them, when you created them, to select clean water projects for implementation or funding, and to prioritize projects in the basin for where the project is located and consider pollution targets. You are now going to authorize them direct them to prioritize projects that achieve one or more of the following public values: protection or improvement of water quality, creation or improvement of climate resilient watersheds and communities, and support of ecological health of the state water. So it's not just going to be water quality, climate resilience, and ecological health. And you'll
Sorry, go ahead.
see a similar change in when they identify projects. You'll see again that they give priority to one of those public values: water quality, climate resilience, and ecological health.
It seems like this would be a convenient place to put the postponement of the sunset on the Clean Water Fund funding.
This bill,
Yes.
sure.
You aware of another bill that it is, that's,
I don't know, and you're speaking of the property transfer tax
Yeah.
surcharge,
Yeah.
scheduled to sunset in 2027.
indeed, thank you for being so specific.
Right, and that I think, it depends year to year on how much that generates. I think it's generating around $5 million on average. In 2027, well, let me say, it generates $5 million on average, but the first $1 million is taken off the top and sent to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund for purposes of housing. Remember, in like 2017, 2018.
And we can dive into like all of that
Right.
math with
Later.
JFO. I was just sort of,
Right.
I think we're gonna need to have a conversation about where that language needs to go, and just thinking that it seems subject wise a natural fit in here.
So
It's moving.
the surcharge doesn't actually go away until 2039.
Yes.
But it reduces from 2%, 0.2% to 0.04% in 2027. And that money does not go to the Clean Water Fund, even though it's still called the Clean Water Surcharge. It then goes to the Conservation Trust Fund. And that's all about that whole effort in 2017, 2018 to issue that housing bond.
Mhm.
That you were taking some of the money from VHCB to do debt service, and you were then replacing that with the surcharge and the first $1 million off the surcharge. That's a lot of working parts, I know.
Yes, and I don't want to actually, I'm realizing now that I don't want to send us quite down that road right now, but I do believe Representative Sims had a question that was more on topic than mine.
I'm just curious whether these changes in priority of focus would run into conflicts with like our EPA commitments. I mean, I think we have a pretty specific plan that we are obligated to fill to meet those requirements. Since we're adding more money, does that not matter? Or?
Yeah, I don't think it will affect the EPA commitments in any substantial way, because frankly, some of the climate resilient projects or ecological health projects are going to have a water quality benefit as well. So if you're going to score on a report card, like EPA scores on a report card, I don't think they're going to give you demerits effectively for doing climate resilient projects versus a pure water quality project.
I just feel like so much of the focus is on the PMBL and Lake Champlain and like focus on that watershed. And I can imagine there are other important like watershed restoration projects.
Right.
In different watershed basins that might not address the PMBL.
But here, just as a response to that, a lot of the issue in Champlain is the scouring and erosion of the water that contribute to the lake, because that's where phosphorus is loading from. And if you did a climate mitigation resilience project to basically reduce scouring, which is also reducing flood risk, then you have a dual purpose there. You'll achieve both a water quality benefit and a climate mitigation benefit. I think there's opportunity for, I don't think EPA will penalize the state for that.
I see all the hands. I just want to make sure we don't go too far down into things that might have Michael say words like scouring, because that's like very outside of our purview. So, okay.
Okay.
So, Representative Brannigan, you're welcome to ask a question. I'm just trying to keep us away from.
If I'm scouring, just get the bromine. Okay, so, two things, there are across the state tons of, volunteer organizations that work on water. I can think of two right off the bat, very successful programs in Franklin County. Are we doing away with those programs and giving all that work to this board and their minions?
No, so the requirement that clean water service providers for each of the major watersheds is impaired watersheds is still there. There's still that requirement. There's still the requirement that they work with local entities to get projects done. So basically what happens is money goes from usually the Clean Water Fund or other sources to you recommend it for appropriation. It usually flows through A&R. They issue grants to the clean water service provider, and then the clean water service provider pushes that money out at the local level, and it can go to local organizations. You're not doing away with them. This whole model is based on getting money to them so that they can implement the projects that the state doesn't have the capacity or resources to do.
So money goes to them now.
Yes.
Are we duplicating?
No. I mean, that first fund that you created, it's going to depend on what their strategy is. If there's going to be duplication, I don't know right now because they have to develop the strategy for moving that money. And so I don't know what.
Well,
if
all
there will
right.
be overlap.
All right, so, on that one, we have to make sure we pick good people so that there aren't duplications. But I think that maybe not duplicating, but sometimes more money is needed. And so that I would not consider that a duplication. It would be an increase to, promote an already successful technique.
And remember that new board will have the ability to leverage existing funds to try to find the most funds available for each identified project / strategy.
All right, so my other question really was about scouring, so I'll hold that one and
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I brought
I
it
don't really know how that works.
up. So similarly to the Clean Water Service Provider, the Water Quality Enhancement Grant Program, which is one of the grants that clean water service providers can compete for, or local watershed organizations can compete for. And the agency has a couple of different financing or grant programs under this program. Its purpose will be similar to the Clean Water Service Provider, one of the following public values: protection or improvement of water quality, creation or improvement of climate resilient watersheds and communities, and support of the ecological health of the state's waters. So not changing the fact that the enhancement program is there. The enhancement program already has a resiliency component. This is now being very specific. It's about water quality, climate resilience, and ecological health. Then you get to the section on the VHCB authority. This is just their authority. This isn't the funding. So it's adding to their authority the ability to spend funds from their revenue sources for planning for climate impacts and improving climate resiliency. They already have authority for natural areas and recreational lands. They already do water quality work. This is just addressing that they can do climate impact and climate resiliency as well. And moving on from there, this is the funding. So notwithstanding any law to the contrary, so you will have to, if you were to notwithstand the property transfer tax, 50%, you're going to have to somehow reconcile these two sections. Does that answer your question? I can't answer how you would do it right now. You're just going to have to, if you're going to do both, you're going to have to reconcile.
I have another question. but it needs to go back. I'm always a little bit behind. To what yes, I think that's probably good. Vermont does have an environmental justice. And there's nothing in here about whether they have to follow environmental justice policy. I'm wondering whether that's an oversight or whether it's something that.
This is, I honestly, I did not check their entire chapter for that. This is just one of their, it's one section. There's about 6 or 7 sections in their chapter. I would have to check and see if there's anything in that chapter about following that. Generally, that's going to be a overarching requirement for state grants funds.
So it's assumed that they would take that into consideration.
I don't, I have to do more research to look at this chapter to answer that question.
Sure.
With any confidence. So you get on section 7, in fiscal year 2025, the trust fund shall receive at least 50% of the revenue from the property transfer tax as required under 10 VSA 312. The board shall use the funding that exceeds its proposed fiscal year 2025 budget for the following climate change mitigation and resilience activities. Continuation of the board's work to achieve more efficient, weatherized, and climate resilient affordable housing, expansion of the board's support for environmental infrastructure investments to improve climate resilience, expansion of the board's support for working lands businesses to achieve climate mitigation, and the use of at least $5 million to be made available to leverage existing and new federal, state, et cetera, resources, and employ innovative financing mechanisms to support Vermont investments in nature-based climate resilience projects.
And so if this passed as drafted, what would be the relationship between this sort of new expanded VHCB and the fund board that you talked about in the first section?
They would be 2 separate funding boards
With similar goals.
with similar goals. What the initial board would do, again, is what projects they would focus on is somewhat unclear, as they have to develop a strategy for that. VHCB already has multiple strategies for the multiple different types of projects that they fund. Those strategies may need to be revised to meet their new authority,
Okay.
but probably not that much.
Okay. Representative?
Can you just explain a little, so it's like that 5 million like match for other resources, is that?
That I think is the sponsor's intent, that the 5 million will be used to draw down more than 5 million that will be used, say, to draw down EPA or USDA resources that are available for water quality and similar projects.
How would you define nature-based climate resilience?
So that is one of the sponsors' kind of focuses, not just in this bill, but in other bills, looking at things like green infrastructure, and projects that are not reliant on significantly manufactured infrastructure in order to achieve water quality and climate resilient goals. Taking things out of development and letting it return to its natural condition is
So like grid hardening would probably not qualify as a nature-based thing, or you know.
like stream bank stabilization, armoring, things like that. That's not a nature base.
And how does this all relate to like the Office of Climate as we're thinking about, or the Climate Office, like different boards with similar?
I don't know if the I don't know what funding that the climate office has, funding authority that they have.
Is there staff from the climate office on the board of the first thing?
No.
And like, I mean, we have a whole plan. It seems like we have a lot of different buckets.
I think one of the interesting things about all of these different bills and as we think about putting them together is maybe some like Venn diagram time around both authority and financing and purpose.
I have a table of the bills that I've drafted that have the multiple proposals from it's 12 pages long. There's
You know, it's a beautiful
four
table.
tables. So,
Right, and have the drafts fit with the existing infrastructure and we have.
The table doesn't go quite,
not that far.
there are no Venn diagrams in it. There's
More than
just
12
pages.
Because frankly, some of the proposals don't have that detail. I think some of the proposals, you're gonna have to provide that detail, the General Assembly stuff.
Even more drafting.
So should I move on?
Thank you.
So section 8 is the basin planning. The Federal Clean Water Act requires all states to engage in what's called a continued planning process for the use of their waters. Vermont A&R achieves that by doing basin plans for the 15 major watersheds. I go out and identify issues and areas and appropriate uses in all of the 15 basin plans. There are requirements for what each basin plan is required to include, and what is being added is at the very end of the long list of what each basin plan has to do is it shall not now identify beneficial flood mitigation projects or practices that will store floodwaters and mitigate impacts to communities from severe weather. And it's a pretty logical thing to add to a basin plan, which is about use and water quality, but also safety, because you don't want to allow something to be sited where it's going to be either a water quality risk or a flood at risk of flood damage.
About the Venn diagram, do conservation districts fit into, are they the ones that do the basin plans or do they do something different from basin?
No, A&R is the one that does the basin plans, and there's a basin planner for each of the watersheds.
I know the conservation districts.
I mean, the conservation districts are a localized group so the conservation districts are technically state agencies. Unfortunately, they are not, or depending on your point of view, they are not funded like state agencies. Consequently, all of the authority that they hold is rarely used as the way it's set out in statute. Instead, they provide kind of support and advice and some funding for some projects, the water quality, farmer assistance, etc. So with regard to the basin planning, they're just interested party that the A&R planners might involve, but nothing more than that, really.
Do their projects have to align with the basin plan or no?
Well,
I know
most-
farmers want.
I guess I think there's, of all the Venn diagramming, I think that piece of Venn diagramming is gonna need to sit in the committee on environment and energy, which I am really finally, I think, able to remember the name of, and that, yeah, and we're gonna focus on that.
What I'm.
Yeah.
Constantly, I mean.
Yeah. The overlap is, yes.
So you're now on section 11, you're in page 11, section 9. And this is where the bill requires the Vermont Center for Geographic Information to use LiDAR or other information to develop additional flood risk maps. It also directs A&R to complete the mapping of the flood hazard areas for all municipalities in the state. But you probably all know that FEMA has flood hazard area maps. But in 2015, I think you directed A&R to do mapping of what are called fluvial erosion hazard areas or river corridor areas. FEMA maps just map inundation flooding, like the slow increase of flood waters that then overtop the banks. And Vermont has that most usually in the larger lakes, but the more common flood risk in Vermont is called fluvial erosion flooding. It's when there's these significant discrete storms that dump enormous amounts of water in short periods of time, and it just scours out the banks again. I mean, scour, and then that's and basically creates new rivers or new floodways. And that's what they are supposed to map. They've been doing it, but there hasn't been a lot of interest at the municipal level, which is what's really driving them to map. So what this bill does is directs them to finish those maps. And then last, section 10, there's a directive for A&R in consultation with ACCD and AOT to develop a statewide green infrastructure program for climate resilience. It's going to address how to incent green infrastructure for the management of
And
storm.
is it part of the fund at the beginning? Separate again.
It could. So this is going to be cited in A&R to have this program to incent green infrastructure. So the agency does have a stormwater management manual, and within that manual, there are green infrastructure opportunities. And so one of the things that they could do is they could amend their rule to give greater credit for green infrastructure. And that means less other infrastructure or less fees that a developer would need to pay in order to achieve the permit goal of no net increase. So, but it's also going to address how to reduce urban heat islands, how to avoid social and economic disruption of climate impacts. And then there is $125,000 appropriated to the agency for a permanent full-time position to implement that program. And then the effective date is on passage. Obviously, some of these programs are going to need time to stand up and actually access funding.
So appropriated, that's in the general fund?
Yes. Yes. All right. Anything?
Is that the bill?
That's the bill.
What's the effective date?
Passage.
Oh, thank. Okay. Representative Anthony, did you have something?
I just, back, I think it's in section 10, Michael, just above. There's no hierarchy, if you will, as between the agencies listed there, AOT, Commerce and Community Development. It's just a consultation with A&R,
Right, so A&R is the one that is required to develop the program.
right?
And they do it in consultation with those other agencies.
Does that imply, your reading of that language, that if there's a collision of objectives or interests, A&R comes out ahead?
So remember, this is it's a good question because AOT and A&R don't always agree on stormwater management and how to do it. And consequently, AOT has its own kind of stormwater program.
And its own funding source.
And its own permit, right? And so, yeah, if there was going to be some conflict, there would have to be resolution. You know, you'd have to rely on the agencies to work that out.
So I'm reading it the way you're reading, there's no solution to that in this language.
And it's happened before, you know, and when they couldn't reach a resolution, they've come here to you to resolve it for them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Someone really wants to know what the scouring means. We have 5 more minutes. Michael.
I'm sorry.
Different question.
Okay. go for
My
it.
question, like, what the pure water quality?
Is that term used or?
Said, it's not a pure water quality, I thought, well,
I mean, it's not solely a water quality.
holy. Except. I don't know what a non-solely water.
Representative Brannigan?
So, she said we had time for scouring. What is scouring? Is that what we've got in Missisquoi? The Missisquoi?
Some of what's in Missisquoi, yes. So it's when you have increased flow in the watershed, which creates additional erosion and the erosion is what carries the phosphorus, the dirt, the soil is what carries the phosphorus. So as flows increase, there's more that's scoured, eroded from the stream bed, stream banks, and contributes to phosphorus in the lake, in all portions of the lake.
Okay,
And when you see it after high precipitation events, when the lake turns brown at the mouths of each of the watershed, that browning, that is the soil that's been eroded from the precipitation and driven into the lake, and it hasn't settled yet in sediment in the lake.
there's some really good examples. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry.
Representative Maslin, nothing, no, please ignore them. Representative Maslin?
On scouring, as Mike said, the flows increased also by necessity, the speed has to increase. Or it's going. Right, you know,
Oh, yes.
okay, and as
Yes.
speed doubles, the abrasive qualities of that with all the gravel in it goes up by a cube.
Wow, we really.
So
It's never rabbit hole, we never really.
it's because of the abrasive quality of gravel and rocks and all that kind of stuff, and it does a lot of damage.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah, I know places where the cornfields are falling into the river.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sandy cornfields
Right.
on 105 heading up
Yeah.
beyond Unitzer. But you know, up until now, I've always heard of that thing that happens as the water hose.
It only happens in your kitchen sink, right?
So I think with that, thank you very much, Michael. We are going to take a break until 10, where we're going to talk about education fund revenue. Oh, I totally forgot.
Now you have
We're not gonna take a break.
-5
We're gonna, Ted, thank you.
Now we get to say cheats.
Yes.
You fulfilled everyone's dreams, Ted, thank you.
You know, I'm happy to do that on Wednesday morning.
So sorry. Thank you, Saoirse.
Oh, good.
We didn't have time for the scouring after all.
It was fun.
Good. What's happening?
I don't know, I'm losing. Normally I can easily find the full screen. There it is. Great. Okay. For the record, Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office. I put together, this is kind of like a draft fiscal note in a high level view of the main monies pieces of this particular bill. I'm going to skip over this first section, given the potential lack of clarity around the 2.5% of the state's cash balance. I understand to be the average daily cash balance, but we want to make sure before diving down that rabbit hole. The next piece is increasing the statutory maximum for water quality enhancement grants from 5 million to 8 million. I just want to provide some information to the committee on the balances in the Clean Water Fund. For that piece, the Clean Water Fund receives funding from, here comes the S sheets. So the property transfer tax surcharge of 2% or 0.2% on different types of property transactions. It's the complete value of not principal residences. And the marginal value greater than $100,000 for principal residences, and then the marginal value above. I do not know why my scroll is working the way it is. Okay, marginal value greater than 200,000 for purchases with certain types of assistance from the USDA, Vermont Housing Finance Authority. Clean Water Fund also gets revenue from unclaimed beverage deposits, the S sheets, 6% of meals and rooms tax revenue, and other sources. This table shows the balance in the Clean Water Fund since fiscal year 2020. Zoom bar is in the way. So the balance in fiscal year 2020 was 12.3 million. It increased all the way to 49.8 million. A lot of that is the large increase in property transfer tax revenues that they'll show in the chart on the next page.
So is the idea that the 8 million would just come from the balance we would need to?
Yes, they have existing authority that's up to 20% of the Clean Water Fund or $5 million. And so, yes, it's just kind of drawing from that balance. And as the balances increase, there's more room to make those types of grants.
Didn't we do something with the S sheets in the ERP bill? Oh, but we didn't, it's not happening, right? Sorry. So it all stays here.
Yes, it all stays here. So yes, that segues into property transfer tax revenues. So general high level look at the various the current statutory allocation of property transfer tax revenues. Prior to any distribution, 2% is supposed to go to a special fund for PBR administration costs. There's 2.5 million to repay housing bonds, and of the remaining funds, there's percentage breakdowns. 50% supposed to go to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund, 17% to the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund, of which there are different breakdowns, 10% to the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. They just put out a fantastic database on all of the property transfer transactions in the state since 2019. I should provide a link to the committee on that. It's fascinating. There's 70% for contracts with regional planning commissions and 20% dispersed for municipalities from the 17%. And then finally, the remaining 33% goes to the general fund. However, these provisions have been not withstood in the budget process since at least fiscal year 2000. JFO has this lovely historical spreadsheet. So I got to see the background on that one. The chart on the next page, and let's see if this happens cleanly.
I just want to remind folks that we have a bill on the wall about shifting some of the thresholds in the property transfer tax.
Great. So this chart shows by each fiscal year the various pieces of how it's actually played out in the budgetary process. You can see all the way to the right that total revenues had a huge jump up during the pandemic as real estate market away. These transactions, the property transfer tax revenue is starting to cool. And so in the 2025 GovRec budget, they're using the figure I presented here is 59.1 million. That's including $1 million from the clean water surcharge. And of that percentage, or of that amount, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund is estimated to get 22.1 million. That's in the GovRec budget. And so the difference between the statutory allocation of 50% And what is in the GovRed budget is $5.6 million. So as you move more money to VHCB, the general fund has to make up that portion. And then finally, I presented a table with that kind of puts all the appropriations for different positions in one place. Yes.
Just going back to the cash balance, I know we sort of skipped over it. Is the logic here that we're like using the interest accrued from that cash, like?
So what is the overall amount? I'll let the treasurer, they're coming in on Thursday to talk. This piece is in their climate infrastructure financing report. And so they can talk more about the mechanics. But it's creating authority from kind of the overall balance that exists, which is over $2 billion.
I just want to remind folks, so this bill wasn't voted out of Environment and Energy and referred to us. It was just moved over to us to spend some time with it. And if we did something with it, it would need to go back there again. Any other questions? Thank you for doing that.
Of course.
Okay, so we are going to take a break until 10, and then we're going to talk about